Buenos dias, hello, bom dia. Welcome everyone. Thanks very much for joining us on day two. My name is Anita. I lead partnerships and strategy at the Giving Tuesday Lab Hub, and I'm taking over the role of introducing and leading sessions today after JP did such a wonderful job yesterday. You'll have seen that yesterday we looked at some big picture issues relating to generosity, how it links to philanthropy, to civil society, to sustainable development. I remember, I think it was Rodrigo that said in the wing session that generosity is not just a moral value, it's a force. And Pablo echoed this in the plenary at the end when he said that generosity is not a charity, it's a strategy. Those are the ideas that we're taking with us. And as Woodrow said as well, it's not just thinking about how to encourage people to give differently or to give more. It's about recognizing the intrinsic benefits of generosity. It's about recognizing that when people give, when they act in ways that are good for the common good, that we really do build the types of societies that we want to live in. And so the challenge is not just giving more or giving differently, it's about building the environment and the structures that encourage people to give more and to make generosity an unmistakable part of our lives. And that's what we've been exploring. But I'd love to know what you think. So if you were here yesterday, take a second, write in the chat, tell us what you took away from the conversations yesterday. It might be a word, it might be a phrase, something that surprised you, something that sparked your curiosity. Please do share with us. We'd love to know what you're thinking about as we begin the second day. And while yesterday was very much about these big ideas, exploring generosity as a concept, today we really want to bring things down to on-the-ground work, to be more practical, to think about what we can do to unleash generosity in our communities, in our locations, in our cities, in our countries, in our states, in our communities. Whether you work in a nonprofit or in the education sector, in the business sector, we hope that you're going to find some techniques, some strategies that will help you in your day-to-day work and your lives. We've got another spectacular line of speakers to share with you. You're going to be spoiled for choice. We have 5 different sessions in each block. You can join sessions that are on communications, on impact evaluation, on volunteering, so much more. And of course, all of this is possible because we have the generosity of the speakers who are joining us and sharing their talent and their insights and their experience. So thank you so much to every single one of our speakers, to every single one of our aliados who's helped with sharing and spreading the word about this event. We really are truly grateful. And all of us, all of the speakers, all of the organizations, all of you, we all work in different places with different missions. But I think that we're beginning to see that generosity is an underlying mission that really unites us all. Generosity is that water that gets into the cracks, it nourishes the soil, it makes the land fertile so that all of our initiatives can work and flourish. And that's what we're trying to achieve. So keeping with that water analogy, how can we turn that little drip of water or that little stream of water into a big gushing wave of generosity? That's the question for today. And one of the things that we've been trying to do throughout these 2 days is always look at that through the lens of Latin America and the Caribbean in a way that's grounded in our context, in our languages, in our cultures. But that doesn't mean we can't look elsewhere for inspiration. So while much of the world of philanthropy is focused on the north-south axis, we thought we would look east and look west for inspiration today. And thankfully, I don't have to be the person that's providing that inspiration. We have 4 wonderful people. So let me introduce them. Chris Worman, you're calling in from Amsterdam, right, Chris? He leads strategy and partnerships at a global level within Giving Tuesday. Outside of Giving Tuesday, he's also the board chair of WINGS, which is a global network of philanthropy support organizations. We also have Catherine. She's based in Nairobi in Kenya. And Priyanka joining us from New Delhi in India. Catherine is director of the Giving Tuesday Hub in Africa. And Priyanka is chief advisor for Giving Tuesday India. So great leaders full of inspiration and experience of finding creative ways to promote generosity on the ground. And we're also joined by Anthea. She is calling in from Trinidad and Tobago, a little bit closer to home for many of us. And she's the CEO of the Caribbean Philanthropic Alliance. And her work bridges philanthropy, policy, community leadership, climate justice, diaspora giving, so much. So we're in great hands. Thank you to all 4 of you for joining us this morning. Chris, I'm going to pass over to you.
Thank you very much, Anita. And it is certainly a pleasure to be joined here today by Anthea, Catherine, and Priyanka. Thank you all for joining the conversation, and thank you for the work that you do around the world each day. For those of you who don't already know this esteemed group, look them up, follow their work. At a minimum, I bet you'll be impressed. You might even be inspired. So, as this conference moves from yesterday's conversations about strategy and theory, I'm hoping we can talk tactics and action, that we can start sharing some examples, strategies to lay a foundation for later conversations today about how we all might do more or do better at working with the communities we care about at this critical time. Fundamentally, each of us can do this kind of work, and you're going to hear some examples that really reflect on the fact that this is work that people, every one of us, can do. And I'm guessing every one of you here believes that. Otherwise, you'd probably be doing something else right now. But how? What in our experiences are good examples? And what do those examples tell us? What are the lessons that we have learned that we might all learn from? What's proven most important as enablers of such efforts? What do you think the real promise of working to engage communities at this time is? So, small, simple questions for our panelists today. But joking aside, I'm looking forward to hearing thoughts and encourage everyone to listen creatively and constructively. What resonates with you? What can you take from these examples and try at home? Enough then. Let's get in. So, the first question to start us off, and in the spirit of good conversation, we'll see how, if we go to the second ones, we just end up having a delightful conversation together. I'm curious from our panelists' perspective, what, with the state of the world, what with everything that's going on around us, I'd be curious to hear one example from your work that gives you faith in this work. Faith that mobilizing local resources and communities is an important thing to focus on right now. Who'd like to start? Anthea, would you like to go?
Sure, no problem. First, I just want to say congratulations to Giving Tuesday for putting on such a wonderful event, and it's a privilege to join everyone here today on this platform. I would say that you've asked a question around local mobilization, and I would think that when we talk about localization, it's what we do here in the Caribbean. It's something that we always focus on. But I understand that, given where we all sit, the world is quite uncertain. Our funding gaps are very big at this point and getting larger and larger. And so our ability to come together and pool our own resources is no longer just about survival anymore. It's about empowerment. And so local mobilization is it's not about if we are going to do it, we have no choice, but how. It's the how. So when we talk about mobilizing local resources in the Caribbean, I would say that is the very foundation of Caribbean giving. It's what we do. It's been going on for a very long time, for generations. It's been practiced with our credit unions. It's been practiced in our agricultural cooperatives. And we continue to do it today as individuals, as families, in terms of pooling resources together for our generations, for our children to go to school. So for us, the act of local mobilization is about resilience, it's about solidarity within the Caribbean. You mentioned that I'm part of a CEO of Caribbean Philanthropic Alliance. And so sitting in Trinidad and Tobago, I have the privilege to connect to all different countries in terms of how they view local mobilization. And the word and the saying that comes to mind is many hands make light work. And what that captures is the culture of solidarity here in the Caribbean. And what that means is that when people come together and share the burden, even the heaviest tasks become more manageable. And so local mobilization is about not surviving, it's about how we do our business and how we rebuild every day. So one example gives me faith, which is the question here, is the Caribbean Tree Planting Project. And it's important to us because that's how we started. Caribbean Philanthropic Alliance started. It began in Barbados, in Bahamas, after Hurricane Dorian, which was a Category 5. A young man named Chaz Garraway, I want to give him the flowers, was moved by the devastation of mangroves. He mobilized his own community to start restoring the ecosystem. And his small action inspired others and inspired Caribbean Philanthropic Alliance. And it's important just to say that when he came to us with this initiative, we were making public commitments at the UN at the time to convene early in the year philanthropy and with wings, and recognizing that the Caribbean needed a convening entity to unify philanthropy efforts within the region. So what started as a grassroots act of restoration quickly became a movement. Within 1 year, the Caribbean Tree Planting Project made a commitment to action at the Clinton Global Initiative, where we stated that we wanted to plant 1 million trees. We engaged Caribbean philanthropy across 22 countries and territories. Over 5,000 young people were galvanized across the region. We had over 347 organizations that joined us. And altogether, we planted over 1.5 million trees. From there, a lot of other activities happened. We created a film, young people created a film called Paradise in Peril that was launched. Creative competitions happened, Plant Your Seed, and it went on. And this particular action, and which became a movement, did not stop at planting trees. It grew into a regional platform for climate justice and sustainable livelihoods, especially for the most vulnerable women, children, indigenous communities. And they themselves on the ground embrace intersectionality. It's not a theory that we talk about it in philanthropy. It's something that they recognize on the ground, that they had to experience issues. They don't experience issues in isolation. So mobilizing resources locally means for them that overlapping realities matter, and that you have to address it in a holistic way. And so I would say that in the Caribbean, this particular action repeats itself over and over and over again. After Hurricane Beryl last year, we all understood that it was the earliest Category 5 hurricane ever recorded last year. And again, through generosity, through local mobilization, without international assistance, neighbors came together, and they were the first responders on the ground to mobilizing food, water, and shelter. And so this gives me faith that when we invest in ecosystems of giving, we amplify what we already know. Caribbean people have the knowledge, they have the will, they have the commitment to respond to their own needs, and that we have to, as a philanthropic community, really support them in their efforts. So for me, it's about putting the resources in the hands of those most closest to the challenges and solutions. And by doing that, we multiply resilience, we accelerate recovery, and we unlock innovation that outsiders often miss. And so this particular Caribbean tree planting project is still going on, and it gives us hope because of the local mobilization to continue to do the work within the Caribbean.
Thanks. It's an excellent example, I think, as well, of how these initiatives can really grow and evolve and take on these different elements. And we can come back to some of that later. And I think some of the questions about what really helped that happen. There was the culture that you've spoken to. I'm curious if anybody asked, or if they just started going and then helped and sort of supported and had an open heart to people joining along. But again, things that we'll come back to, what really helped that become true. Catherine, would you like to go next? We can just go alphabetically.
Yeah,
Sorry, Priyanka.
absolutely. Absolutely. Thank you so much for sharing the case study in Jamaica, and specifically because it's so close to something that the African continent, but also from my lived experience, really influences how people give and how they care, and that is culture. So one of the things that gives me Faith is one campaign that for the first time they represent corporates, they are in government, they're just individuals, young people, old people, come together to deal with a crisis that happened in 2011. So the crisis in question was in 2011, we experienced one of the worst drought experiences ever in history. We were looking at 3.5 million Kenyans facing starvation, and including 500,000 of them being refugees. And the worst challenge of it all is that almost 500,000 of those were children. So this was a story that really drew a lot of attention. And one of the things that really inspired me is to see just how Kenyans showed up to take responsibility for once. There wasn't stories on the media and reports for appeals from external parties appealing to external parties to come in and deal with these calamities. It was young Kenyans, it was corporates, it was governments asking ourselves, how do we contribute? So the campaign in question ended up being called Kenyans for Kenyans, just representing that spirit in mind. And because we have a very strong telecom culture, Safaricom, as one of the largest telecom company, led collaboration of corporates, governments, and individuals to lead and mobilize all Kenyans of all forms and in whatever resources that they had to contribute to counter the famine disaster. So in about a month, everyone contributed about $11 million. And these are contributions from what you could imagine, someone who has $10,000 to give to someone who has $50 to give to a collective fund. And one of the things that really inspired me about this is just how the messaging resonated with a group of with Kenyans in the way that, yes, regardless of the faith that we all held, regardless of how we understood the challenge, everyone just showed up, mobilized, took over campaign responsibilities, developed their own micro campaigns just to mobilize resources towards this. And really, that was an opportunity and a moment that really inspired how I think about our assets as a community, and how it is really important for us to think about the space that we occupy and how we lead, how we message the appeals that we make nationally. And one of the reasons why this worked so well really is it wasn't coming from a point of desperation. It wasn't really coming from a point of pity. There was a sense of pride and solidarity and a sense of responsibility that this is our shared problem. And we are coming in with whatever resources. So it wasn't just about contributing financials. I know I did mention that, but over $300,000 of in-kind support was contributed. It was also about activating networks in multiple levels, from large-scale corporates to media houses, and ensuring that they are really connected with the grassroots organizations. So in terms of just acknowledging all the assets that we hold as a nation, this campaign really drew a lot of attention. I think one of the other things why this was such a great success was the fact that the messages were trusted. So because the message resonated so well with everyone who was part of this, there was a sense of trust in a way that we hadn't seen when it came to appeals to support nonprofits. So it was really, really connected to culture. It was also really connected in the style of messaging that was happening. And then the other thing is just the fact that people came together to collaborate so well, drew not only a sense of urgency and agency, but was also a form of credibility. And so just the this experience shows that if we are able to just think about a shared problem, work together and use the right messaging to mobilize around that shared problem, there is just a lot that we can do to bridge trust gaps. There's just a lot that we can do to activate infrastructure that really resonates and that is really relevant to us, like the campaign did with mobile money that gave everybody access and a pathway to contribute to something bigger. Yeah.
Catherine, something you mentioned, you used a word, sort of micro campaigns in this. Does that mean, and we're starting to get into some of the how, and then Priyanka, I promise I'll go to you immediately. When you said there are micro campaigns, was this set up with the mobile, with Safaricom in a way that anyone could start their own campaign to mobilize their network? But it was sort of all contributing back to common cause? When you say micro campaigns, what does that mean?
So this was a collective fund that leveraged mobile money. That means that Safaricom has the way mobile money is set up is that there's something called a pay bill that everyone who is connected to the mobile system can use to contribute to a collective fund. So it was a national collective fund that allowed multiple contributions in any way. And in addition to that, in form of incentives, normally any transaction via mobile money has some form of taxation of payment that is attached to it. But for this specific campaign, government set in incentives, so it was tax-free, and transactions did not have an additional cost to it. So everyone was convinced that every single shilling that they are contributing was really going to the basket fund. So it also goes to show just how the micro elements or the micro enablers of giving connect to the macro aspects of giving. So yeah, that's basically the context.
Thank you. Priyanka.
I'm going to the other end of the spectrum. I mean, I love these two examples, and they're examples of, how movements come together and how sort of lots of people come together. But I've been intrigued by how does that start and kind of what's that catalyst moment? And the story that I keep going back to for inspiration is quite an extraordinary woman in India. Her name is Anjum. She is an elected representative. So she is part of official governance systems. But Anjum's background is interesting because she is a middle-aged woman from a Muslim community in rural India. Now, I recognize that, India is halfway across the world for most of you, but the reality is that the intersectionality of Anjum's reality means that power is a really interesting thing for her. So she has power because she's an elected representative. But in all other aspects of her life, her experience is that she doesn't have power and she doesn't have the ability to do the things that she wants to do and to create the change that she wants to make. She went through a leadership program with the GivingTuesday India Hub and several of our partners. And something extraordinary happened in that process. And we can come to that when we start to talk about the how. But what ended up happening is we saw Anjum's, Catherine talked about taking responsibility and about the trusted messenger. Anita talked about water. And I think that's what we started to see. We started to see Anjum stepping into her role as a trusted messenger, into her role as somebody who has responsibility, and start to create those mini ripples. So what she really, really cares about is the status of women in her community. She thinks that, if she can keep girls in education for longer, so higher education, that leads to better outcomes for them throughout their lives and therefore for their families. And it's the route to creating change in her community. But she doesn't have the financial resources to be able to incentivize those families to keep girls in education. And for a long time, she'd been stuck with that idea that there was no money. and didn't know where to look. And I think Anthea talked about this as well, which is you're waiting for money to come from the outside, and how do you sort of start to think differently about that, and how do you start to see your own community, your own village as really rich in resources. What Anjum was able to do was she was able to identify where resources exist in her community. So who are the people who have the resources she needs? And she identified a whole bunch of local business owners and spoke to each of them about her dreams and about the change that she wants to see in her community and what it's going to take to get there. And she managed to get the owner of the local gas company to commit to giving 5,000 rupees, it's $60, to every family whose girl stays in higher education. Now, very often when I tell this story, people will sort of look at each other and go, what's $60? It's like, what kind of difference does that make? And to me, you're missing the point if you focus on the $60, because the ripples that you see are incredible, because this has changed the way Anjum sees herself as somebody who can create change and who can really sort of expand those ripples into a wave. She has created a system that is going to invest in the women of her community, and that's going to see long-term change in her community. And her relationship with this one business owner means that his world has changed, and his connection to community has changed, and his investment in creating change in his community has completely transformed. And that to me is really, is one example of how those big movements that both Catherine and Anthea talked about, that's sort of where it starts. It needs that kernel of an idea and somebody with the conviction that they can actually go out and make this happen.
Mm-hmm. Thanks. I think it gets to some really powerful points about the large movements. Massive amounts of money are great and they're wonderful when they happen. However, I think, to me at least, I would agree that that's sometimes missing the point, that the practice of getting people involved and engaged and really learning how to do this work and finding their joy in it is what will mean the next movement happens, and the next one, and the next one. So that when we start moving into this question about these examples and what helped them work, what had to be true for each of them to be successful, I'd be surprised if part of what was true that made these movements successful, this work in any of these examples, was that there was an understanding that it wasn't just about the money, right? It was about the community. And even if there was a certain amount they were trying to raise for something, that wasn't exactly the point, versus creating a culture of contribution or uplifting a culture of contribution. To your point, Anthea and Catherine, points been made, and I'm sure, I know, very true in India as well. Those cultures are there. There's a question about how we catalyze those cultures towards collective action and collective ends that are, perhaps beyond our familial networks, towards the kind of rights or environmental issues or other issues that civil society traditionally works for. I'm curious then, sort of with each of these, I heard about culture being an enabler, technology, in the case of Catherine's work, an openness to sort of evolution. I would say, Anthea, it started in mangroves, specifically planting trees, but then you mentioned there was a movie and there were other pieces and all these intersectionalities that emerged. So sort of an openness perhaps towards allowing or supporting evolution, encouraging it. What are the things that stick out to the three of you when you think about these examples, things that you would want other people to think about if they're trying to mobilize their communities? What's really helped? Priyanka, I could start with you. We can go backwards this time on the list.
Sure. I think there's something about Anjum's journey that is extraordinary in that. And now there was investment in Anjum and in her journey, right? And that's if you ask me to sort of boil it down to an equation, it's not an equation, but it's the input that she received, perhaps, that actually helped with the transformation in the way she was seeing things. But it's the shift in her attitude, and it's the shift in the way she thinks about resources, power, agency, and not just for herself, but for the people around her. that's really what kind of transformed. But it was being able to really focus investment in Anjum's own learning and her own introspection. I think that was the key piece. It wasn't just about, here's a curriculum, now, we've trained you and now you're ready to go out and change the world. It was creating spaces for Anjum to reflect on who she is, how she operates, what her relationships are in her community, where she thinks about herself as, as a node in her community, and kind of really giving her the opportunity to build connections that will, encourage her to go to the next level. So it's really about, for us in that example, I think it's about people, and it's about, just being able to find the right lever to unlock potential. Yeah. And that's
Yeah.
there. It's everything, right? So
Yeah, no, I mean, it makes sense. I think, these cultures that Anthea and Catherine spoke of, they are global. That doesn't mean they manifest just every day, just because the world's hard, it's difficult, and it's telling us all we're going to fail all the time. There has to be some trigger, some support to say, no, we know how to, like as Anthea was talking about, we know how to take care of ourselves. Let's do it. And then somebody has to lead. Somebody has to be sort of confident, and that confidence can be built, which is a lot of what your work in India has been about, right? So, Catherine, what about you when you think about your examples or other examples for the folks who are calling in today? What things have really helped? What are the enablers that you think are most enabling? That's a bad sentence, but you know what I mean.
Yeah, I think one big enabler that most of the time we take for granted is space, a safe space to bring together our assets, to bring together our thoughts and our hearts, to think about the best way we can all show up to support our communities. And that's one of the things that really resonated with me, not just in this campaign, but many other campaigns that I've seen led by individuals or corporates or groups. Just having that space to think about how can I best show up and how can we collectively support each other to do the things that complement the assets that we have. So that's one thing. And then the other thing that really resonates with me, and I think it's a great enabler, is just the opportunity and the infrastructure to support multiple forms of giving. Right. So I think it's a deterrent, or I would say it's a sort of a blocker when the spaces and the infrastructure always create a pathway for financial giving, while there are so many assets that individuals have to offer. And I'll also just back it up with findings from a data commons research, and I think that resonates with all other cultures, is that if you give in one way, you're likely to give in multiple ways. So why not set up the infrastructure that allows us to maximize the kind of support that we can receive from the community? The other thing that's really, really key is this was not just about donations, right? It helped us understand the assets that are among us, but it wasn't just about donations. You can imagine 67% of the $11 million that was contributed was from micro donations. That means 10 Kenya shillings, 100 Kenya shillings, that's less than $1 or $1, right? So beyond just the numbers, it's the level of participation. How many people it took to get to that total number, and what mindset was changed by because they participated in the Kenyans for Kenyans. And you can see that outcome manifested in conversations that arose from this, in conversations about how do we deal with long-term factors that can help us deal with this. So how do we look for more sustainable ways of countering drought and famine before it even happens? Those were national conversations that were happening because people participated in this campaign. And the extras that the extra cash that came out of this campaign was used to kind of prepare communities or support communities handle or support communities implement sustainable ideas that they had in the first place. It also drew conversations about what led us here. What are the structural and systemic challenges that we are facing that led us here? So for me, it's not just about donation, it's not about joy, it's also about civic engagement and civic participation, and this as a pathway for that, which is a great opportunity for those who've seen it, but a missed opportunity for us if we don't have the infrastructure to support it. Yes.
And I would add to that, perhaps it sounds like honoring that everyone who showed up or who could show up was a human being with a brain and a heart, and not just treating them like a bank account, not just treating them in one way or another, but actually having a richer conversation, which is not always easy to do, but I think certainly helpful if you want a relationship with people who could be volunteers or donors. And to your point about people giving in multiple ways, absolutely. There's this myth in the sector that you shouldn't ask your volunteers for money. The research says you should, that they will love you for doing so. They will appreciate that you respect the fact that they are already committed to your mission. Ask nicely, certainly, but don't leave your closest friends out of the conversation. Another thing you said, Catherine, that I think is extremely important and has come up in a lot of the Giving Tuesday research as well as others is the creation of space being critical. Third spaces, that we need to find spaces to bring people together online and offline to get to know each other and trust each other. A lot of what is beautiful about civil society, what really makes it work, is association, right? That this is the associative space. We come together to solve problems. That must be true of our donors and volunteers as well, that we need to bring them in and respect them for who they are. And then you'll see they stick around longer. They get to know you better. It becomes a relationship instead of a transaction. So, again, I think for anybody really looking at doing this, if it is safe to do so, bring people together in your communities and you'll be happy that you did. Anthea, in your experience, what do you think's really enabled?
First, I can just say I agree with everyone so far. You're all saying what I believe in. But when I think about the trigger for the Caribbean in particular, is that it's our reality, the vulnerability that we are experiencing. 97% of our people live along the coastlines and are directly at risk. And so our local mobilization is based on the fact that our reality is quite dire in the context of climate change. And I, think about data that we understand. Between 2000 and 2019, we suffered over 200 climate-related disasters, causing more than 30 billion in damages. That's huge. And that we know that a single Category 5 hurricane can wipe out 200% of small islands' GDP in one day. So our trigger is very easy. It's just the reality when a disaster hits, we experience devastation. And so, the example that I gave around this young man in Bahamas that mobilized and started to get his community together to plant trees and to plant mangroves is because of the reality that's in front of us. So that's number one. Number two, I would just say that the example, has to do with relationships and trust. That's a big one. In the Caribbean, again, we know the answers on the ground. We know that what we need after a hurricane, we need to plant trees, how to organize ourselves. And I think for us in our community, in the philanthropic community, in the generosity community, we have to understand that what works best is when we meet people where they are and build on their strengths instead of imposing outside solutions. I think that for me stands out. And I say, the reason why the Caribbean Tree Planting Project succeeded, because it wasn't top down. It was youth groups, it was schools, it was churches, it was agricultural community. They were leading the way And they were also supported by diaspora funds over time. One of the things about our giving and generosity, while we know that humanitarian funding rarely reaches local organizations the way they should reach, according to data and research. I think it's 10% of global humanitarian funding ever reaches local organizations, but they're the first to respond. In the Caribbean, we have a strong diaspora community that gives as well. And I need to share that. And that has a lot to do with trust, that our diaspora communities outside of the Caribbean really trust their local people and that they know how to use it. And so I think we need to speak to that as well. And that success requires trusting local leaders as partners. And I think with the Caribbean Tree Planting Project, the way we organized at Caribbean Philanthropic Alliance, when we were just organizing, we trusted the young people on the ground. 5,000 young people are on the ground doing the work, mobilizing, and that they understand when we trust them. When we trust them, we give them the authority to lead. And I think that's a very critical component when we talk about success. And I think, for the Caribbean, around climate resiliency, we can be a beacon for all other parts of the world to understand that when we are addressing climate change, we do it not only through localization, but through trusting our local leadership to innovate, to mobilize, and to rebuild, even with limited resources. And so it's having institutions like ourselves really willing to stand beside communities and to believe in what they do. And I think that is, so relationships and trust, I think was the key, was the trigger as well for why Caribbean Tree Planting Project was successful.
Yeah, no, I appreciate that very much. And I think it's something I've found myself speaking to in philanthropic circles where there have been some conversations about systemic change. And yet the way they're trying to fund systemic change doesn't include local people, their behaviors and their cultures, and sort of how they want to lean into the change that the funding community is looking for. And I fail to see how that's going to work. So I'm very glad that you were, in this case, and I'm sure in other practices, very focused on exactly enabling and supporting the intention and the power and the brilliance of the people that were already doing the work, right? I think there's a lot in the conversation about local resource mobilization right now, especially with the end of the global development aid paradigm that many of us, have understood or tried to understand for the last several decades, with government funding really stopping in a lot of ways. That, as you said earlier, Anthea, we have no choice. For many communities, they never had a choice. They had to build their own funds. They had to come together around the things that they wanted to solve. That said, I think there are places where it makes sense for philanthropy to invest in different kinds of enablers, ecosystems, infrastructures that can help everybody on this call work better, faster, smarter. An example that I've witnessed and written about is with the Romanian American Foundation, an organization I'm on the board of. The organization has invested $6.3 million over the last decade into community foundations, 6 million into a network of community foundations in the country, and 300,000 into 2 online giving platforms. 6.3 million, a little bit more into training for how people would use the online giving platforms. And the return has been more than $100 million raised from local people, tens of thousands of Romanians contributing towards civic causes, social causes, education, health, etc., on a fairly ongoing basis. A lot of strength and trust that was built through those interactions with what it means to mobilize locally. 6 million for a return of 100 million. That number keeps going up because those organizations are still there. And I think also critically, Anthea, to some of what you've raised, and Catherine, what you've raised was sort of crisis resiliency. The infrastructure was there. When COVID hit, they were able to catalyze resources in support of communities who otherwise wouldn't have gotten protective gear. When the crisis began in Ukraine and there were Ukrainian refugees coming across the border, they were able to mobilize new resources from a broad base of people to support them. The infrastructure was there. The practice of giving was there. So there are many examples of this around the world where philanthropy has made an investment in the sorts of infrastructures that would then enable this kind of resource catalyzation on an ongoing basis, crisis or not. And I think I'm curious. I am curious sort of on two fronts. One, from all of your perspectives, if there was one thing, if you could sort of wave a magic wand, or if you could have one wish for investments in this space that would help people mobilize, come together, catalyze more resources. I'm curious if you had something you would ask for. Is there one thing you would ask for? And then I have a subsequent question, I think, which is about sustaining this work between crises. But we'll see if we have time for that one. But I think it's fascinating that there's a lot of crisis response that gets people to engage. How do we work with those moments to really create sustainable, ongoing conversations with communities about resilience? Or do we? I don't know. It's an interesting question. But to the first one, Anthea, you were last, so you can be first. If you could wave your wand, what would you ask for?
No, gosh. Good question. Very good question, Chris. One wish for the philanthropy right now would be investing in local giving ecosystems. Not because I'm in it, but I think it's important. And regranting intermediaries that are rooted in the communities. So that would be the provision. They have to be rooted in the communities, because I understand, and we all understand that, we could have many projects, but they can't shift systems. And that we need resource institutions that are representative of the people. So like women-led funds, youth-led organizations. I heard Priya talk about some, Catherine talk about it, community foundations, regional platforms. So you create the conditions for philanthropy, and there are terms that get thrown around all the time about decolonization. But if we create the conditions for philanthropy to decolonize itself and truly practice trust, I think that would be fantastic. And it would be important as well that that the infrastructure that we are investing in moves away from short-term restricted grants towards more multi-year flexible support. We talk about it all the time. I think we've been talking it for over 20 years. I've been making that case that this is not something new. This is something I've been hearing forever, but we need to really stop and do it for the first time. Let's make it happen. Let's allow our communities, to set their own priorities and pace. Let's make it happen. And let's enact and action trust-based philanthropy and what it calls for. And let it not be abstract. Let's set it into practice. Let's see it practice. We see it all the time in the Caribbean. We see women-led initiatives across the Caribbean. They are at the forefront of disaster response and resilience. Let's give them the money. So we already know what works, and what they often lack is infrastructure. And so the first vehicles, the regranting mechanisms, the convening platforms that we could channel and grow resources in sustainable ways is where I put my money. And that would be my wish.
Same here.
That's the short answer, I guess. That's the short answer. So investing in ecosystems of trust.
Earlier this year, I wrote an article about exactly that. That was called "Better Late Than Never," because it is better late than never. The fact of the matter, according to Wing's research, is 80% of the investments globally in philanthropic ecosystems and infrastructures happen in the global north. It's happened in the United States, Canada, and Northwestern Europe. We cannot keep expecting communities or hoping communities will somehow be able to do all these wonderful things if they don't have the infrastructure. So stop talking about it. To your point, we know what works. Put the money on the table. Priyanka, do you have a wish?
I'm going to borrow Anthea's wish, and then I'm going to build on it, if I may, because I think Anthea just sort of said exactly what we've been thinking about and talking about a lot in India. But to me, if I had sort of a magic wand and I could look at investing in one specific part of building those ecosystems, I'd look at storytelling and narrative building. And I think that's a fundamental piece in doing a whole bunch of different things. So really building on existing culture and being able to amplify that so that people recognize themselves in that generosity narrative and recognize that this is not an alien concept that's come from somewhere else. This is something that is very much a part of our lives. Our communication strategy or our communications campaign in India is called Born Generous. And it is exactly that. It's about highlighting the fact that this is not something you need to learn or adopt or bring in from somewhere else. It's something we already do and live. It's also about, it's that narrative building to make giving accessible and relatable. So this is not just about the person who has, $1 million to be able to write a big check. This is about every single individual's giving, and it's what Giving Tuesday is built on as well, right? It's the notion that everyone everywhere has something to give and every act of generosity counts. And I think it's common language that we're missing as well right now. It's common language about how we relate to each other, how we relate to community, and how our generosity really binds us together. It's something that we experience, and if we were to think about it a little bit more deeply, I think we would have the language, but it feels very much like we need the work to be done to help us tell those stories more effectively.
Thanks, Priyanka. Catherine, one quick wish.
I'm lucky that I'm going right after the two speakers because I feel like I'm just under the contributions that they've made. So thanks, Anthea. I'll back it up to say that if I had one wish is to understand the donor or understand the contributor. I feel that, especially in the case of Africa, there's just so much we don't know about what motivates people to give, what motivates people to keep giving, and what can encourage them to give more. And that is really anchored on cultures that influence them and influence them today, but also just the everyday motivations and influences that go beyond what we have in the continent. So for me, it will be investing in data on individual and collective giving at the continental level to inform everything else that we're doing. Yeah.
Super. Well, we're running up on time, so I think I would begin closing the session by just thanking everyone for sharing. I certainly hope that everybody who's joined us today has found something interesting in the conversation, and I encourage you to keep the examples and suggestions in mind because, as they've shown, you don't need to be rich, famous, or some kind of unicorn to catalyze great things in your community. We've heard about a woman in a small town in the middle of India who happens to be from the Muslim community working to bring a bunch of people together. Anthea speaking about a young man in Bahamas, in the Bahamas, starting a movement. Catherine talking about all the micro gifts that added up into this work and sort of the focus on community, culture, and some of the enablers of it. So things to keep in mind. You don't need to be, your last name doesn't need to be Clooney. You just need to get started. You got to keep at it. And I think hopefully part of what you're hearing too is that there's a lot to hope for right now. People are fundamentally decent. And as these and other examples show, they will work with you to leave their communities better tomorrow than they find them today. So thanks again for joining. I hope you join some of the other superlative conversations lined up today. And again, please join me in thanking our panel here. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank
Thank
you.
you so much, Chris, Catherine, Priyanka, and Anthea for sharing your insights and ideas. You're giving us a lot to think about, and we're only just starting the day. Thank you again to Maria Eugenia, Andrea, Yvette, and Mario, our interpreters. So just as a reminder, from now on, you have 3 hours. You can choose which session to attend. Most sessions are in Spanish, but there's always one available in English and one in Portuguese. We'll see you there. And at the end of the day, 2 p.m. Eastern time, we'll see you all back here for our closing plenary session. So thank you very much to all our panelists. And we're looking forward to having a very productive and beautiful day for everyone who's part of Generosity Without Borders. So thank you very much. Bye-bye.
Thank you.